Welcome to an episode of the Habit Chess Podcast. My name is Ms. Bahak, and if this is our first time crossing paths on this show, I like to talk about skill stacking, and I typically read books that you're too busy to read and share what I learned. And so in today's episode, I'm going to be sharing what I learned from reading This Is Strategy by Seth Godin. To start, Seth Godin is somebody that I've been following and reading his work for over 10 years now. There's several books that he's written which have had a big impact on me. So I was very excited when I first saw that he has a new release out. I was even more excited because he's talking about strategy in this book. And strategy is something that in my work, I have seen more and more people who have, been coming to me for this and have been requesting it specifically. And so it kind of had this relevant pull where I was like, I'm so curious how Seth is going to describe and tackle such a complex topic like this. The first thing to note is that there are no page numbers. These are basically riffs is what Seth calls them. And so he made this because in all of the different book formats that there are today, when you're reading on Kindle versus when you are, listening to a book, page numbers aren't as relevant. And so I thought it was interesting how Seth brought up in one of the podcast interviews he did around this book. He mentioned how the whole point of writing a book is so that it starts a conversation, right? And it gets people talking about it. And so he hoped that by naming it and ordering it in the format of riffs versus just page numbers, that people would be encouraged to pick certain riffs and talk about them. I thought that this was really smart because he's engineering a way in for these ideas to spread. And so in this episode, I'm going to be covering about the first 100. This is a very dense book, and it's something that I'll probably come back and do more episodes on for the later riffs. But I'll tell you the thing that it reminded me of right off the bat was The Daily Laws by Robert Greene, and then, The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. I really enjoy when writers who typically write very long books distill some of their thinking down into a page, right? A page per topic. And Robert Greene is an excellent example of somebody who it's a masterclass to see him do that page by page. But the one downside sometimes with those formats is when you go by date, so it's like there's a passage for each date of the year, it can sometimes feel like you're not reading it as intended when you jump around. Yet, it still is something where you're going to do that. You're going to jump around. You're going to read different parts of it. And so I like how Seth kind of engineered that and built it in, right? So it's in such a way where I can jump all the way to the end and read one of these riffs, and it wouldn't feel out of place or out of order. So anyways, let's start with my first highlight. This is the opening riff. So riff number 1, strategy is a philosophy of becoming. Who will we become? Who will we be of service to, and who will they help others to become? This is strategy. Strategy isn't a map, it's a compass. I love this opening description, right? Because it forces you to think the butterfly effect, the chain of effects that happens based off what you do, right? What does it help others do? And then what are they going to do with that thing and help? I really like how he talks about strategy being a compass, right? It's something that you build in such a way that you can come back to it. When you feel kind of lost, when you feel down in the weeds, you have something that's able to zoom you out and in the heat of the moment and the cloud of it all, able to give you the next right step, the direction that you should follow. This is cool. I like how riff number 3 here, he mentions that once our basic needs for food, shelter, and health are met, most people dance with 3 conflicting desires, and that's affiliation, status, and freedom from fear. And in short, affiliation is community, fitting in, being liked. Affiliation is wearing the right fashion, using the correct salad fork, and knowing the words to the song around the campfire. Status is always relative. Who eats lunch first? Who's up and who's down? And freedom from fear is an internal construct. Fear can be used as fuel, but it's more likely to be avoided. For some reason, this concept around status specifically is something that I remember hearing Seth talk about this 12, 13 years ago, but it didn't hit the same. I didn't quite understand what that meant until I had a chance to see it all play out in front of me. So he's going to dig more into status later on, which I really like because it seems like this superficial thing, but you can see the vital role that it actually plays in all things, whether we consciously choose to play status games or not. I like this part. Most of us don't walk to the stream to fetch the day's water. Instead, we're happy to pay a small fee to get water from a pipe which comes from a treatment plant which is part of the city's infrastructure. We don't try to persuade every person we meet of our status and knowledge. Instead, we paid with time and money to engage with an educational institution that awarded us a certificate in exchange. And even if we spend our days working as a soloist, we're not alone. We're part of a collective or an industry, a system to take inputs and outputs and turn them into something of value for all participants. I really like this concept of how he's talking about something as simple as water coming out of a pipe, because after a little while, you take it for granted, right? There are many of these types of technological developments, which after a little while, you just don't even think about it anymore until it's maybe gone. And what's cool about this, it just reminds you that something is of value to someone, right? It just reminds you, we need other people, right? Nobody can just completely live on their own with no other help whatsoever. You can, but you may not be able to scale and dive into the things that you want to as hard as you'd be able to do with other people's help. So a prime example is, hey, if you do decide to walk to the stream and get water into them versus just deciding to turn on, the pipe and letting water come out, you might feel better about yourself, right? You might feel more connected to the earth, connected to nature. Cool. There's a lot of those arguments maybe, but it doesn't defy the fact that at the end of the day, it is costing you time to do that. And the difference between somebody doing that versus not doing it is how important or enjoyable do they find that thing. Somebody might get a lot of fulfillment and satisfaction out of walking to the stream and fetching their water. But if you don't, then it's a very easy way to probably get 5, 10, 20 minutes, 60 minutes back in your day that now can be reinvested into something else. And I just like the idea that even if you work solo and you feel like you do things alone or by yourself, you don't have to feel that way because you are in fact a part of something larger, right? Your physical location, your physical community, the broader concept of being a part of the world. There are all these systems that we are collectively a part of, sometimes by choice and sometimes not. Systems are more than built objects. They are the collision between those objects and the natural world. They're the complex interactions of culture, of humans engaging with one another, of nature and chaos. This is a simple line, but these 3 words for some reason stuck with me. But information changes systems. And this is important because the systems that you look at that feel really outdated, like, wow, nobody has updated this in like 100 years. Those are typically examples where we can obviously see that there's been floods of new information, yet the system has stayed the same. It has not reflected to update with the information that's available. And so this is encouraging because it's like there's so much new development, new information that is being discovered day to day that it no longer makes sense to be like, you know what, I'm going to figure it out myself and I'm going to go through every single failure myself, instead of learning from some of the other people who have already accumulated that information. So it just reminded me that the point of a system isn't just to exist for no reason, right? It's supposed to help make things easier. And so if you have new information that would have an impact on the system, the longer you wait and the longer you don't do anything with that new information, that's when it begins to feel like, man, the system is getting really outdated. It's useless. It's not even worth it anymore. This was cool. If you want to grow a garden, you'll need to plant seeds, but it's the ecosystem and the climate that will determine what happens after that. Our job is to find a plan and then create the conditions for our project to spread from person to person within and across the systems that already exist. This terminology of being able to create the conditions for your project to exist, for your project to spread, I really like that because it paints something in my brain. It makes me go, okay, well, what are even those conditions, right? Your brain naturally asks, what are the conditions that I would need for this project or for this plan to spread? And then again, it makes it easier by being able to connect it to a system that already exists, right? How does this interact with the way that the world already is, with the platforms that are already out, with the people that already exist? A game has the following elements: players, rules, scarcity, choices, feedback loops, and outcomes. Calling the project a game gives us a chance to depersonalize our work, to be more flexible in our approach, and most of all, just to talk about it. Here are a few things about games that are generally true. You don't have to enjoy the game for it to be a game. You're playing a game whether you realize it or not, and seeing the game helps you play it better. The outcome of a game often has little to do with how much you want to win. Everyone playing the game sees it differently. Some games are easy to quit, other games are forever. Not all players follow the same rules or have the same goals, even when playing the same game. No game stays the same for long because playing the game changes the game. Short-term gains can lead to long-term losses and vice versa. Sometimes the best way to win is to help others succeed. Large games are made of smaller games all the way down. Most games are not fair, and some games cannot be won. The most valuable skills in one game may be useless in another. Some games become easier as you win, others more difficult. You don't have to play the game you're offered. Multiplayer games sometimes conceal themselves as two-player games. We often spend more time figuring out how to win the game we're in instead of choosing which game to play in the first place. I thought that this was an excellent bulleted list of game theory in a nutshell, right? You always hear about game theory and studying it and using it to your advantage. And I think that in less than a page, Seth Godin did an excellent job kind of going over some of the key bullets, right? And the title for this riff, by the way, is number 28. There are games in every strategy. So each one of those bullets gave me something to kind of think about, and gamifying anything that we do can go a long way. And I've experienced this with time. So my Notion time tracking template, which by the way, you can download for free in the description below, that is kind of something I created to help gamify work, right? To help make it kind of fun, to feel like I'm getting credit for every minute, every 2 minutes, everything that I put in, every input that I put in for my business, for my work. And so maybe that's the lesson here, right? Anything that you're feeling that is, there's a lull, right? There's something that you want progress in. There's something you want to understand better. Whatever that is, can you apply some of these theories about gamifying it to help make it easier? I like this. Number 29, we are all time travelers and we are all farmers. The seeds you plant today won't grow for weeks or months. I think that's a great reminder because remember, in today's day and age, everything feels super instant, right? When you hit add to cart, it shows up to your door 2 minutes later. And that kind of thing has to have an impact on our expectations and how we move across different sectors of our own worlds when you have things that are so immediate like that. And a lot of these conveniences and luxuries aren't just for the rich or the exclusive anymore, right? A lot of this stuff has become accessible to everyday people, to where that instant delivery, instant gratification is available at all times, to where it's no longer just a certain segment of the population that has reached that. It's almost everybody that is maybe able to benefit from this idea that, hey, something that I do now may not take, something that I do now, that input may not show itself in an output for a very long time to come. And I think that that is a skill in and of itself, right? To be able to take action and be peace with whatever the results are, especially if there's nothing being shown. Seems obvious and seems like something that we all knew for a very long time, but I think with technology, with science, with innovation, it's a principle that's worth reminding ourselves about from time to time. Time is simply nature's way of making sure everything doesn't happen all at once. Strategy is the hard work of choosing what to do today to improve our tomorrow. Either we make the system or the system makes us. Oh, this is cool. A series of 17 questions shines a light on the work to be done. It brings tomorrow forward to today, right here and right now, allowing us to articulate a strategy. Here they are. Who are we here to serve? What is the change we seek to make? What are our resources? What is the genre we're working in? Who has done something like this before me? I like that one. What systems are in play? Am I changing someone's status? Why would anyone voluntarily choose to be part of this work? What will they tell their colleagues? That's a cool one too, right? Like envisioning that. Who gains in status, affiliation, and power by supporting this work? Will early support translate into more support later? I like that that's not just an assumption that it will. Where is the network effect? Great question, being able to identify that. What do I need to learn to make this work? Excellent question. This one I feel like most people don't ever ask. Like, what do I need to acquire? What new skill? What do I need to learn? Because almost everything is learnable. The hard part is sometimes choosing which one is it, and am I willing to do it? Who do I need to work with? Where is the dip and when should I quit? this is actually a good one too, because he wrote a book called The Dip, which is all about kind of knowing when it's going to get hard, right? And calling that and deciding ahead of time, hey, when it gets this hard, what will I do? How will I react? Where is my line? When do I quit? And I think those are all things worthwhile to think about, even and especially when you're kind of in the moment, like, oh, I would never quit. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life, right? That's the moment when it's, when you're optimistic to think about some of this and begin to plan for what will you do when you are in that valley. What will I do if it doesn't work out? This one's a really good question because you can really hedge your bets here and make winning happen either way, right? So even if you lose, you can kind of craft yourself into a winning situation, but it comes through entertaining this question. What will I do if it doesn't work out? And how much is enough? This one's a great one because I think that in modern day society, if you do not answer that question of how much is enough, then by default, the answer is infinity, right? There's no limit. So as soon as you define a constraint, you now have something that feels tangible. And as Seth Godin likes to say, you're on the hook. But if you don't decide what enough is, then hey, you have infinity, and infinity is easy to blame sometimes. Simple doesn't mean that you're making a smaller impact or settling for less. It means choosing a strategy that puts you on the hook. It's a chance to be a meaningful specific, not a wandering generality. It's funny that his whole being on the hook concept was naturally on top of mind there, and it came up right next. So I really like that. Right. So simple is the idea of something being like the second something is too, you've heard probably Steve Jobs say this before, right? Simplicity is actually harder than complexity because you have to actually do a lot more thinking to distill things down to the simplest way to articulate it, the simplest way to make it, the simplest way to design it. And so this is his whole concept of choosing. He talks about choosing the smallest viable audience because that also puts you on the hook. I'm making this for this person or these 10 people, not I'm making this for this 1 million, 2 million person market, because that feels so big and vague that you're not on the hook, right? Versus if you're making something for one person or 10 people that are expecting it from you, there's a draw that you feel, a pull that you feel, an obligation that you feel towards them that you might not to this faceless 2 million person market that I referenced. I love the heading for this. One telephone is worthless. Alexander Graham Bell didn't invent the telephone. He also didn't wire the world, or create 100 numbers, or come up with the smartphone. What Bell did was build the Bell system. He published and licensed the protocol for local businesses to hook up their phone networks to the larger global network. The breakthrough was in seeing the obvious fact that a telephone works far better if you can use it to call anyone else who has a telephone. Over time, that meant that every phone user has an incentive to work with the biggest system. Build a useful phone network, and every phone user will eventually insist that the non-phone users they know go and get a phone. And yet, even with the extraordinary advantages in speed, efficiency, and community that the phone brings, it took 75 years for 1 million people to have one. That's because networks used to be difficult and slow to build. And it only took Facebook 10 months to reach 1 million users, 100 times faster than Bell took. A few years later, Mr. Beast made a video that reached 1 million people in less than 2 days. Few people reading this are working to build something as universal and game-changing as the telephone. But everyone reading this can benefit from understanding network effects because they're everywhere and with more impact and speed than Bell could have imagined. I really love this riff because it goes to show you something that I kind of have implemented into my business. And I actually heard the founder of Calendly tell this story where he was referencing how in order to use your product, someone else has to use it too, right? So when you are booking a meeting using Calendly, someone else has to see that and, gets exposed to the product too. So this was really cool to see because I've implemented this concept into my business at Pod Mahal, and I did so very intentionally, right? Every time someone uses product, which is recording a podcast, or maybe they're sharing a long or short form clip, someone else is also involved in that, right? So it might be the guest or the co-host that they did it with, but it's basically allowing that product to spread across a network without much extra help, right? So for example, when we have a great clip that takes off or some videos that do really well, typically some people in the audience will ask the person we work with, hey, who does your clips, or where did you get this done? This is awesome. And so we've gotten referrals at Pod Mahal long after we've even stopped working with certain clients, because that's just the power of certain network effects. If the clip that we made is out there, it creates the conditions that allows someone else to go, hey, this is cool. Where did you get this? How did you make it? And it now gives an opportunity for my business Pod Mahal to take advantage of this network effect. Of course, that's just one example, and you saw another one here with the telephone, but I think this was a really powerful riff. Every person in your life is connected to someone else, to countless someone else's. Each decision we make is about our standing, our connections, and our community. Cities are connectors. When they work, it's because the others are there as well. The successful city persists because it's worth more to be part of it than to be apart from it. And the metaphor is real. Our project, the network effect, the movement, the connections, they are a city. Our city, a system that is part of other systems with a chance to make change happen. We can create the conditions for it to thrive. No one wants to be hustled. Plenty of people are eager to be part of something that matters. I really like this description of not just cities, but being, something that people want to be a part of, and the way he kind of paints that. Creating the conditions for success is a very different project than finding a heroic move that saves the day. Wait, let me back that up, because this whole riff is actually really good, and it's kind of short. So it's called Analyzing the Last Move. When the deal falls apart, the team loses the game, or a partnership hits the rocks, it's easy to focus our energy on the most recent event. What if they had called a different play? This overlooks the real issue. It's the first move, or the fifth, that led to this problem, not what happened at the last moment. Creating the conditions for success is a very different project than finding a heroic move that saves the day. I think that's a really important point, because in many cases, it's up to us to figure out what the bottlenecks are, what the friction points are in the things that we're doing. And that's kind of dependent on us being good at being able to identify and break down what those are. And so if you analyze the wrong lesson out of a move, that kind of skews your learning and how you're going to apply that the next time, the next 10 times. So I really like this one because it kind of brings to center, okay, look at all of the different moves and which one of those actually contributed to the outcome that you weren't happy with. Don't blame it on just the last move. Tactics require skill in the moment and can consume us. Strategy is easy to skip because we've trained our whole life for tactics. Strategy is a philosophy based on the awareness of our goals and our perception of the systems around us. Tactics are the hard work we do to support our strategy, but great tactics don't help if the strategy is working against us. We manage to fill our days with activity, but how can we show up to make a difference? There are 3 ways to put effort into a project. I really like this. Chores and tasks, number 1. Leverage, number 2. And number 3, emotional labor. Chores and tasks are work we hire ourselves to do. This might be most or all of your day, clearing your inbox, answering your phone, doing your job. Leverage is the work we outsource. Outsourcing is far easier than it used to be, but challenges us to use our resources wisely. When we do the work that only we can do, we generate enough value to hire others to do the chores and tasks that they're willing to do. And emotional labor is the work of change, decision-making, and strategy. It is the difficult work of embracing as we learn new skills, and the challenging work of seeing and then implementing real change. This is easy to avoid, which is one reason we spend so much time on chores and tasks. I think this one is a game changer because I've heard Seth talk about emotional labor over the years, and I didn't really fully grasp the concept, or I didn't care about it as much maybe when I heard it the first few times, but I get it. I get what he means now, because I have seen time and time again that a lot of the things that I've done or I've seen other people do that I really respect and admire weren't just out of leverage or chores and tasks. Those things come, right? But those would have actually never came or had the opportunity to present itself if emotional labor was not present. And part of emotional labor is moving forward when you're doubted, when your vision isn't the popular one. These are all things I think I and Seth would categorize under emotional labor, and it seems to be the very thing that holds most of the field back rather than some of these other areas, right? And so anyways, being able to put effort into a project, you have these first two, but he talks about how emotional labor is really the way where you can kind of double and triple down on your effort. And that's not really often how we look at things. That actually sounds exhausting at first, right? Like, oh, I'm going to emotionally drain myself if I do that. But at the same time, the emotional labor is work of change, decision making, and strategy. And so it's that stuff that you can typically table till tomorrow. You can table till next week. But if you choose to take it on sooner, I think it makes the other types of effort listed here, like chores and tasks and leverage, function a lot better. Strategy is a compass that helps us to take action when we're uncertain, to build networks when we're alone, and to persevere until the world we live in becomes the world we imagine. This quote is so good. I really love this one. Strategy is a compass that helps us to take action when we're uncertain, to build networks when we're alone, and to persevere until the world we live in becomes the world we imagine. I like this because strategy gives hope, right? When you feel like you have a good strategy, you feel hopeful. You feel that even when things are really hard, okay, I see the end, I see the light. But when you feel like you've got a bad strategy, things might feel shaky, right? You might feel confused. And that's what I like about how he said strategy is a compass that helps us to do these things when it's not quite a reality yet, when there's actually very little chance of seeing that become a reality. That's when the strategy has a role to play. And he gives a couple examples here in the next riff, right? You might need a strategy to get into the college of your choice, find a new job, increase sales of your new product, decide where to live, get your neighbors to come to a local block party, and many, many other situations. But again, coming back to, and to persevere until the world we live in becomes the world we imagine. So I like this riff where he's talking about Esther, right? And Esther, this is about a story in 1983, but he's talking about this woman who was editing a small newsletter. And at its peak, the newsletter had fewer than 5,000 subscribers. But the demographics and attitude of her audience more than made up for its size. Every venture capitalist, investor, and tech media company was paying attention to the newsletter, partly because everyone else was paying attention. Esther offered two things. She had the guts to go first and make assertions about what was next in tech. And second, she was the coordinator. By curating the topics to be discussed and laying out a point of view, she gave the tech industry an agenda. The more she did it, the more valuable it became. She changed the system and then became part of the system. She made millions of dollars from the newsletter and far more from her investments, but even more important is the fact that she made an impact. Several things to point out in that riff, but the main one being in this world today that we have where everything is about hundreds of thousands or in the millions, right? Nothing less than that seems valuable or impactful or like it's a big deal. But one of the things I wanted to point out, this number he mentioned, 5,000 subscribers, it's significant to me because 5,000 is a number that I've heard from many conversations that I've had with people who are in very niche industries, right? Where they're like, yeah, if I had an audience of 5,000, like that would be a win. That is equivalent to the 1 million in many cases. Because again, it's about who is each one of those 5,000, right? So 5,000 subscribers that are like venture capitalists, investors, or tech media company people versus 5,000 teenagers, right? Different story. Or 5,000 cats, different story. And many of these people that I'm referring to, including myself and some of these niche areas, would take the 5,000 really focused and valuable people that their message is really for over 1 million of the wrong people. So if you had 1 million teenagers that you wanted to consume this message versus the 5,000 people who are VCs and investors, which one would you choose? I mean, of course, maybe if you're Mr. Beast and the stuff would actually appeal to the teenagers, that makes more sense. There's more value there, right? But in many cases, I feel like the world is playing a game where they're really trying to appeal to like 5,000 people and make an impact on them, but we're somehow chasing the millions and millions before we realize, oh, that's not the way to go, or that's not really who I'm trying to serve. It's actually these 5,000 people that it dwindles down to. So great lesson there. Thanks you, Esther. Effective marketing isn't about hype or hustle or even getting the word out. Instead, it focuses on engaging with people who seek to engage with us. Our job is to find a resilient path forward by helping people get to where they hope to go. When we get compensated for creating value in a way that enables us to do it again, we found a business model. Pizza place turns flour and cheese into a slice and gets paid enough to cover the rent, salaries, and make a profit. Jumping down a bit here, a useful business model has a few attributes. One, it gets easier over time. Past success makes future success more likely. Number two, it's a welcome contribution to the lives and projects of the people who are paying in time or money for the work. And number three, it's resilient. When the world changes, the model adjusts and persists or even thrives. And while it doesn't work the first day, it needs to work eventually. Time is the unseen driver of strategy. This one's really good. If I want the real truth about a business and where it's going, I divide the modern business plan into 6 sections. Number 1, truth. Number 2, assertions. Number 3, alternatives. Number 4, people. Number 5, money. And number 6, time. At the end of this riff, he goes, your local venture capitalist might not like this format, but I'm betting it will help your team think through the hard issues more clearly. Oh, I like this one. The thing about effort. Try harder. They tell you to overcome your fear, develop better habits, take it personally, be vulnerable, and be sure to post it all online. The advice implies that if something wasn't wrong with your character, you'd have no trouble succeeding. But going faster is useless if you're running in the wrong direction. Strategy is a commitment to seeing the race course before we begin. Ooh, this analogy is really cool. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and learned about driving in snow. The first truth is that stopping the car is harder than you think, and that means that snow tires are the single best way to stay safe. The second truth is that a car in motion is much easier to drive than one that is already stuck. Both insights involve traction. The first one recognizes the traction needed to make forward motion so you can get to where you're going. And the other recognizes that traction is always easier when your strategy is aligned with the world you live in. Our strategy sets us up for success when it's based on the reality of the systems all around us. Oh, this one's good too. 12 slogans. What do we talk about when we talk about strategy? Consider these building blocks. The future is an unvisited city, but we can see it from a distance. The audience can be chosen. Don't play games you can't win. Projects can be managed. We make decisions. A difference can be made. Assets can be built. Networks can be created. Traction is the way forward. Sunk costs can be ignored. Organizations change. And you're not sitting in traffic, you are traffic. The first job of the marketer is to find a problem and to solve it, helping the customer get to where they are going. And the second, which from a marketing perspective is ultimately more important than the first, is to give that person a story to tell others. This is really important because this is what he's talking about that allows ideas to spread. And I've noticed this, which is even if it's a tagline for like a book or something, right? Or it's a little one-line description for a podcast, you'll often repeat what you heard. So whatever description you heard is what's going to come to you in the moment when you go to tell someone else about it. And so this is kind of the opportunity that you're really trying to craft for, which is making it super simple, not just so that the one person can understand it, but so when they tell somebody else, it's very simple and clear and they feel excited using the language that you gave them, which at the end of the day probably makes them look better in front of whoever they're telling that information to. A tactic is what we do next. A strategy is all the nexts, one after the other. Tactics are for now. Strategies see and respect and value time. If your tactics work, then they should advance your strategy. If your strategy is flawed, all the successful tactics you engage in won't help. So those were my highlights from the first 100 riffs. If you are looking to read the next several hundred, or you just want to dive into some of the ones that we dove into, make sure to get the full book in the description below. I appreciate you hanging out. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to share it with a friend. It goes a long way when you share the Habit Chess podcast with somebody else. So if you do that, thank you in advance. But I appreciate your time. And other than that, make sure you rate and review wherever you're at. That would mean the world to me. But thanks again, and I will see you on the next episode.